G'day mate, 40 here. Remember when the big story in the news was about 5 months ago, was a raid on Donald Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago, Florida to retrieve classified documents, and there are all sorts of horrible, deadly, dangerous classified documents that Trump was keeping, and how reckless Trump was. Oh, it's so unprecedented to have law enforcement raid the home of a former president of the United States. It seemed like a dramatic escalation in partisanship in law enforcement. And I didn't have any reaction for about 24 hours. And then when it happened, I said, this seems to be, a partisan federal law enforcement attack on Donald Trump. And as Steve Saylor says, it looks like it was a fight over memorabilia. And here's Mickey Cowles talking with Ann Coulter.
It just shows how weak the charges were against Trump to begin with. I mean, it's classified documents, as you say, can be your mother's cooking recipe.
Yeah, that's the point. It shows how weak the charges were against Donald Trump to begin with.
Classified basically means very little. Everything's overclassified. So Biden had some floating around his office. Trump had some floating around his office, unless they were nuclear secrets or things he was going to sell to a foreign power or use against somebody. It just doesn't seem like a big deal. There are all these procedures designed to preserve records for historians. It's as if the entire government works for historians, not for the people of the United States.
So yeah, this touches on a bigger issue, is that we often take what is in the news for what is important, and we often take the decisions of various bureaucracies as that which defines reality, and we often equate our national interests with, say, the interests of this or that government bureaucracy, and we often take a federal government bureaucratic report or a local government bureaucratic report as the closest thing that we have to truth. And sometimes that's true, but frequently it isn't. So much of the news is simply battles between different bureaucracies.
And you're bound to trip up over some of them. And this sort of proves it. You don't think if they went to Obama's office in Chicago, they discover some documents that he hadn't checked out with the National Archives? Of course they would.
Yes, and I would add that you and I have been consistent on this.
So Republicans, now that they have control of the House of Representatives, are making investigation of federal law enforcement agencies a top priority, which makes sense, because it sure does seem like the FBI, the Department of Justice, have been mobilized against conservatives. Think about those three guys in Georgia who have received life sentences for trying to go after that jogger who they suspected of stealing. And then the jogger grabs their gun, and in the struggle, the gun goes off and the jogger gets killed. And federal law enforcement was just all over that case to put those three white Southerners away for life.
Thinking that documents are way overclassified. You can get anyone on it. It's like a lot of the campaign finance rules.
Yeah, so a lot of people have the attitude, I'd never do anything illegal. And generally speaking, moderately, that's a good idea. But thanks to the proliferation of laws, we're all breaking, dozens of laws every day. And so you can't equate that which is legal with that which is important, or with that which is moral, right? Or that which is righteous. Yeah, generally speaking, obeying the law, a very good idea. But there are so many laws, there's so many government bureaucracies now that it's bewildering, and we can't allow these federal government bureaucracies to define reality for us. And these federal government bureaucracies seem to be overwhelmingly dominated by the left. And so you see with Joe Biden administration and with the Barack Obama administration, they're principally interested in removing guns from conservatives, from law-abiding Republicans, from law-abiding white people, and they have no interest in taking guns away from inner-city, urban Biden voters. Right? There are sacred groups who you wind back law enforcement for. Right? So from the woke perspective, there are sacred groups like blacks, gays, Jews, the transgendered, and you can never criticize them, and you can't hold them to the same standards that you hold everyone else. And that's what it means to be woke.
You're gonna find something. I agree with that. I also sort of think this is the media trying to trick Republicans into going mental over this. How dare he? Classified documents. And at least from what I can tell, it was only 5 documents, and Biden's own people turned them over. It's not like they were under a subpoena. So it's a very small version of what they're going after Trump for. I think they're both small in either event.
Yeah, breaking the law does not equate to doing something important or horrible. I mean, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Right? The decision of a jury does not equate with truth. Right? You can persuade a jury, manipulate a jury, find a jury that will go along with just about anything. I mean, you even found a jury said O.J. Simpson was not guilty of murder.
But if they get Republicans on the record, and I can name which Fox News host will be on the record making a big deal about this tonight, they're going to look really stupid.
Well, I have a different take, which is I've expected the Democrats to turn on Biden as soon as the election was over.
Yes.
But they don't want him to run again.
I was wondering about that.
And, this could, I don't think Dick Sauber, the attorney who found them, really would.
So have you ever gotten fired or, suffered an unexpected loss, being removed from a community or a friendship or a relationship for seemingly trivial reasons? But often people just want to be rid of you, and then they're just looking for a pretext. They want to protect themselves against litigation. They want to have a plausible sounding pretext. And so what Mickey Kass is talking about, when people like the Democrats want to be rid of Joe Biden, then here they get a plausible sounding pretext. So it is currently 2:17 p.m. here in Maroubra in Sydney, Australia. It's a Wednesday afternoon, listening to Ann Coulter talking with Mickey Kass.
On this conspiracy, but there may be people telling Merrick Garland he should really make this seem serious, potentially disqualifying and go after both of them, which would.
Yeah, they could very well appoint a special prosecutor to go after Joe Biden, which might also bring in documents and information found in Hunter Biden's laptop. $10 million for the big fella.
Just what the Democrats want. They want both of them gotten rid of. It's actually what the American people want too. It could fit in with that pattern.
Yes, if the media, I still think the smart money is on Joe Biden as the nominee, because once you get rid of the octogenarian Democrats, you are down to the Ilhan Omar Democrats. So I think they're going to do the weekend at Bernie's thing with Biden. But if the media turns on Biden, oh my gosh, is he finished? He would be the easiest president Democrat for the media to finish off, I can imagine.
Right. You could. There's a certain genre of reporting, which I call the tom-toms of doom, which is Johnny Apple of the New York Times was a specialty. Important sources say foreign leaders have lost faith in Biden. And they're like, they could do it pretty easily. I think he would be hard to convince, but I think he could be convinced to take one for the team.
Yeah. So many of the arguments against Biden that were by, say, Trump supporters in 2020 and were repetitiously, minutely rebutted by the mainstream media in Joe Biden's favor. Mainstream media is now going to be trotting out many of those same arguments when they consider it is time to get rid of Joe Biden. So a lot of stories, a lot of information, all right, it's value neutral in one context, and then in a different situation, you can weaponize it and get rid of someone.
So anyway,
so that's what to look for, viewers. And as long as we're doing this Insta response, unless you have something else on Biden and the classified documents, I wanted to ask you about the Republicans are voting on the rules changes, all these big compromises that the new speaker, Kevin McCarthy, agreed to. And I think the rules changes, as well as the speaker's vote, is really, really boring to normal people going around New York this weekend. I have Republicans, calling me saying, "Oh, this is so bad for Republicans. They look like they're in such chaos." And then I go talk to normal people. They have no idea what's going on. They do not care. They don't see chaos. And I think the rule.
Yeah, that which is of prime importance to you frequently matters not at all to other people. So something that is of prime importance to your neighbor probably matters not at all to you. So to media types and political elite types, what's going on with the Republicans and House of Representatives is, an absolute disaster. For regular Americans, not so much.
Votes tonight is along those lines, but also had a few other things to say about that. What do you think about the whole?
The only thing I really have to say is there's all this talk about how, Kevin McCarthy's inheriting a diminished speakership. Well, we don't know what's coming down the road, and this is the so-called poison chalice argument. He's better off not to have it than to have this weakened speakership, which is almost always wrong. So it's good for Kevin McCarthy that he won this job, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a left-wing political reporter who's just so relentlessly left-wing, like Mark Barabarak at the Los Angeles Times, and he came out very quickly with a story on Kevin McCarthy is being elected House Speaker, and the deals he had to make, that they're going to cost all Americans. And so that's a very common left-wing trope about what a disaster this will be for all Americans, that House of Representatives Speaker has had to compromise and participate in a system of democracy. There are just some journalists who are just so relentlessly partisan and left-wing, it's pretty pointless to listen to them.
May turn out to be able to wield power more effectively than we thought. The second thing is, these idiot Republicans are going to use these rules to go after entitlements with regard to the debt ceiling. And this is the suicidal urge of the vestigial Paul Ryan philosophy of Republicans, although Chip Roy, who's not a Paul Ryan figure, is part of it. But the Republicans are right. Social Security is heading for bankruptcy slowly. Medicare is heading for bankruptcy more quickly. Let the Democrats clean it up. They're the major supporters of the programs. It will have to be cleaned up one way or the other, before they go bankrupt, and or maybe even after they go bankrupt. But why did the Republicans have this kamikaze urge to attack social programs? Keep in mind, the Republican base is now working class voters. Many of them depend on Social Security and Medicare. There was a time 5-10 years ago before Trump when I thought it was the only thing they had to cling on to. The only framework you had in life was if you just hang on until 65, you're going to get your Social Security even though your steel mill closed and all your jobs left. You're stuck in West Virginia. If you hang on, you can get it. And why would a Trumpian Republican want to kick that out from other people? I don't understand.
That's a good point. I do have a few more points on the entitlements where I disagree with you, but to get back briefly to the rules changes and the McCarthy thing. So put a pin in entitlements because I want to come back to that. The rules changes, I think everything that happened was really magnificent. I think it's made Kevin McCarthy much stronger. He will have a better speakership. And my reason for that is the rules they were demanding, which Politico and the media keep describing as, it's chaos. What's he going to do now? Politico's big example of the chaos was...
Yeah, I don't think the House of Representatives is so chaotic because they've already passed legislation to investigate the partisan bent of U.S. federal law enforcement agencies. So they're already getting important legislation passed through the House of Representatives.
Representative from Alabama, I forget his name. But anyway, on Friday night, he said he was leaving the steering committee. And today he changed his mind. Total disarray. I'm not seeing it that way, Politico. No, you like to get into these things. But among the rules changes are things that I think, it reminds me of Contract with America that Newt Gingrich pushed through, or ran on, rather, and a lot of Republicans ran on it. And that is just really blindingly simple and, I think, popular rules, such as we get 72 hours to read a bill. That's one of the rules. They can vote to remove McCarthy, which, from what I understand, a lot of the resistance to him was he'd make a promise to this group, promise to that group. And
So what if you made it really hard for Republicans to remove Kevin McCarthy? Right? He'd have less incentive to do his job well. Like if you don't allow divorce under any circumstances, you're saying that your job as a spouse, you cannot be fired from that. At any time you tell people that they cannot be fired from their job, right, they tend to put forward inferior effort.
Trust him. So, okay, having that hang over his head, I mean, then there has to be a vote again, but one person can bring that vote. That's good. It'll keep him telling the truth, keep him honest, keep him holding his promises. And the other thing I saw that came out of the Tea Party rebellion, or whatever they're calling it, is my one great fear, yours was that a Democrat or a Democrat-like Republican would end up as the speaker. Mine was that Dan Crenshaw of Texas would end up chairing the Homeland Security Committee. And that appears.
So Laura Loom has been incredibly active on Twitter. She's been calling Dan Crenshaw an alcoholic. I haven't heard this from other sources, but it wouldn't surprise me given what we know about Dan Crenshaw.
Has not happened. They put a really strong guy on immigration. Kevin McCarthy has put a strong guy on immigration in charge of Homeland.
Crenshaw's bad because in addition to being a showboater, he's weak on immigration.
Oh, yes. And he's very short.
He thinks America is an idea.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Look, people who think America is an idea don't deny that it's also a society that's based in part on kinship, that the Constitution says we're doing all this for ourselves and for our posterity. So just because people articulate one aspect of nationalism, be it ideological, religious, kinship-based, civic-based, constitution-based. It doesn't mean they're necessarily denying other aspects of nationalism. It's just that some aspects of nationalism, it is more socially acceptable to highlight.
You want a wall, you're a Nazi. He'll tell you nothing else in Germany.
Now that you mention it, last time immigration reform came up, and unfortunately it looks like it might come up again, the motion to vacate was fairly crucial in intimidating Boehner into not bringing it to the floor. So unless the Freedom Caucus has flipped on immigration, which is entirely possible, everybody there except for like 5 people is totally weak if you scratch the surface, and potentially a sellout. But if they stay strong on immigration, they can have the same effect on McCarthy, who always needs bucking up, and say, look, if you bring this to the floor, sorry, you're toast as speaker, and that might be a useful thing.
Yes.
Now that you mention it.
Yes, my one objection to the rebels, and then we'll get this up right away, is that, I'm all for them, and all of a sudden I hear they're beholden to Donald Trump. What on earth? You guys, yes, 2016, he ran on this stuff. If you want to be, Trump-like, push the immigration issue. That would have been popular. Again, only a few people were paying attention to this, but you want to show that you're the real right-wingers and the real populists and the real patriotic Americans. Take Trump's 2016 position on immigration.
Are the people who rebelled saying they were beholden to Trump? I know the press is saying that McCarthy is beholden to Trump, and McCarthy thanked Trump effusively. But that's because in his final vote, after the 14th vote, when it looked like they were going to adjourn, Trump called 2 of them, and they all flipped and voted president. That's what put McCarthy in the speakership. So it looked like Trump played a key role. Now, maybe that was a setup by Gates to make Trump look like the kingmaker. Entirely possible. But
yes, apparently Gates and Marjorie Taylor Greene are still beholden to Donald Trump. And of course...
Yeah, so there are a ton of news articles about how Donald Trump doesn't have any political pull anymore, that he's a weak, lost man in a political wilderness. But just because someone doesn't have absolute power, 100% power, 100% success, just because someone suffers setbacks, right, doesn't mean that they don't have some power. Like, we all have some power in some things, and Donald Trump certainly retains some power, some influence, however imperfect it may be.
There are 2 of the 6 people in the universe who have endorsed Donald Trump's presidential campaign.
I'm beginning to think that Larry Hogan of Maryland might take the lead soon over Donald Trump. Trump's. It's hard to believe that his presidential run is as bad as it looks. So it can't possibly be as bad as it looks. But I don't think they are beholden to Trump. I think that's a media concoction.
I hope it's fake news. And if you want to know how Trump's presidential campaign is going, you'll probably never hear these words pass my lips again. You have to read Olivia Nunzi in the current New York Magazine.
Oh, really? I've been resisting doing that.
It's hilarious.
I hate all these showy pieces making fun of Trump people and Trump allies and Republicans. It's a staple of the Atlantic and New York Magazine, and she does it well. But you think I have to read it? Okay.
Well, Skip, you can get back to me on that.
Okay, that's Ann Coulter talking with Mickey Kaus. So, reading an interesting article in the New Yorker is about how do we think, right? The different ways that we think. And so obviously some people are visual thinkers, and other people are more auditory, and other people, more verbal. So how should we think about our different styles of thinking? From the New Yorker by Joshua Rothman.
Annals of Inquiry, published in the print issue of the New Yorker with the headline, Thought Process. What really goes on between our ears?
So it completely ignores IQ, right? So when you're smarter than average, you live in the future more because you're more likely to see the consequences of things. You're better able to plan, and you are more capable of empathy, understanding other people's points of view. You're more capable of understanding the repercussions of everything that's going on around you. So the IQ angle is completely ignored, right? Because higher IQ people have access to more empathy, right? They're more likely to seek, via Apple News. I like my Apple News Plus subscription for $10 a month. I get plenty of bang for the buck. So if you have a higher IQ, you have access, the ability to have more empathy, and so you're more likely to choose cooperative solutions. And generally speaking, crime doesn't pay in first world nations, so you're much less likely to commit crime. You're much more likely to have empathy for other people, and so return lost objects. and the like, and this is completely missed. Also, it's verbal IQ that makes for influence in life and higher incomes. So if you have a higher than average verbal IQ, you have a higher than average chance of having higher than average educational success, professional success, stay out of prison, earn more money than average, and have a higher than average chance for cultural influence. Like all these basic aspects of IQ are ignored. Also, that different groups have different levels of IQ. That some groups are more verbally gifted, such as Jews. Other groups are more gifted at rotating objects in three-dimensional space, such as East Asians. Like all these juicy group differences in thinking, all right, don't get discussed. Also, how in African vocabularies, they are so small, like so lacking in exactitude, so primitive compared to the European and the Romance languages, right? And we think overwhelmingly in words. If you don't have words, you don't really have a thought. And these basic parts get ignored in this New Yorker article.
Written by Joshua Rothman. Narrated by McLeod Andrews. I was 19, maybe 20, when I realized I was empty-headed. I was in a college English class, and we were in a sunny seminar room discussing For Whom the Bell Tolls or possible.
And thinking doesn't just occur in our brains, right? Another weakness in this article is that thinking just occurs in our brain, but our body starts reacting often before our prefrontal cortex reacts. Like we have more primitive parts of our brain, which often react before the prefrontal cortex, the rational, analytical part of our brain reacts. So the brain is part of the body, and we have a central nervous system all throughout the body. So digestion, all sorts of things going on in the body are operating and shaping our thinking way before the prefrontal cortex gets involved.
Possibly the waves. I raised my hand to say something and suddenly realized that I had no idea what I planned to say. For a moment, I panicked. Then the teacher called on me. I opened my mouth, and words emerged. Where did they come from?
Yeah, so some people think before they speak, right? The introverted types, and other people think through speaking, people like me. So I'm kind of evenly balanced between introverted and extroverted. Unless I'm feeling happy and confident, then I significantly tend far more in the extroverted direction. So when you're extroverted, right, you think in large part by speaking out loud.
Evidently, I'd had a thought. That was why I raised my hand. But I hadn't known what the thought would be until I spoke it. How weird was that? Later, describing the moment to a friend, I recalled how, when I was a kid, my mother had often asked my father, "What are you thinking?" He'd shrug and say, "Nothing." A response that irritated her to no end.
Yeah, so why do men say I'm not thinking anything? Because they learned that they cannot say what they're really thinking and not get punished for it, right? So if you create an environment where a man can tell you what he's really thinking, he will, right? It's a delight to be able to share what you're thinking with someone else, right? So whether it's a sexual appetite or intimacy appetite or verbal appetite, all right, it depends on the context you create. Do I verbalize audibly my thoughts when I'm alone? Rarely. I don't speak to myself very much. What I do is I journal and I make live streams. So one of the ways that I go about thinking is making a live stream and thinking socially. But I do far more journaling and just writing things down. 100 times more of that than talking aloud.
How can he be thinking about nothing? She'd ask me.
Oh, the other thing I realize is I don't see myself. I don't know how much self-talk I might do unless I'm living with someone or I'm in a close, intimate relationship. When I'm in a close, intimate relationship, I got all sorts of feedback about how I really operate, which is often quite significantly different from how I thought I was operating.
I've always been on Team Dad. I spend a lot of time thoughtless, just living life. At the same time, whenever I speak, ideas condense out of the mental cloud. It was happening even then as I talked with my friend.
I noticed the power of situation to change my thoughts. Like, my dad told me, you'll never take the same thoughts out of a cold shower that you take into a cold shower. Absolutely true. Now, I think different thoughts when I get out there in the ocean. Think different thoughts when I'm in Sydney compared to Los Angeles. Think different thoughts when I'm at a sports bar compared to a synagogue. I think different thoughts outside a church than, say, outside a mosque. I think different thoughts when I'm around, attractive young women. I think different thoughts when I've got very mundane tasks that I have to slog through. So the context profoundly changes my thinking. Bloody hell.
Articulating thoughts that had been unspecified yet present in my mind. My head isn't entirely word-free. Like many people, I occasionally talk to myself in an inner monologue. Remember the milk? 10 more reps. On the whole, though, silence reigns. Blankness, too. I see hardly any visual images.
And chat says, my mind is hyperactive. It's hard for me to get my thoughts down on paper. You may have ADHD. It's an incredibly powerful explanatory variable. I found delving into ADHD on YouTube videos just been very interesting and very helpful. Now, if you looked objectively at my life, you would say that most aspects of my life certainly no longer demonstrate full-on ADHD, but you may have a degree of ADHD, all right? It comes in degrees of intensity, right? You may have the formal diagnosis of ADHD, which in America requires the participation of someone close to you who's better able to assess the power of various ADHD symptoms in your life. But just like with bipolar or narcissism, right, you can have some tendencies in that direction without having the full-bore diagnosis.
Rarely picturing things, people, or places. Thinking happens as a kind of pressure behind my eyes.
Well, OCD or ADHD at this point, what difference does it really make? Well, the difference it makes is that there may be a solution, and the solution between ADHD and OCD may be different. So I'm not a psychiatrist, but getting help in something that's ailing you is life-changing. Now, another significant difference I notice in my thoughts is time of day. So when I get up, there's a drone. Within a few minutes of getting up, my thoughts are hyper alert and sharp and positive and excited. And then they start to dim in optimism, excitement, positivity, intensity as I go through the day. So usually, mid-morning there's something of a slump, and then I got to admit I'm fighting a slump right now. I just had so much strength and energy yesterday. I was out there swimming in the ocean. I just felt unlimited strength and energy, diving under the water, sprinting through the water, snorkeling, hiking. I just felt I had unlimited reserves of energy yesterday. And then today and this afternoon, I am just flagging. So the degree of energy I have going on has a profound effect on my thinking.
But I need to talk out loud in order to complete most of my thoughts. My wife, consequently, is the other half of my brain. If no interlocutor is available, I write. When that fails, I pace my empty house muttering. I sometimes go for a swim just to talk to myself far from shore, where no one can hear me. My minimalist mental theater has shaped my life.
Say I need red meat. Bro, I took 6 beef organ capsules this morning. I had 6 beef organ capsules, had a big fat juicy mango for both breakfast and lunch, then some like some protein granola for breakfast, a nice big old salad with avocado for lunch.
I'm an inveterate talker, a professional writer, and a lifelong photographer. A heady person who's determined to get things out of my head to a place where I can apprehend them. I'm scarcely alone in having a mental style, or believing I do. Ask someone how she thinks, and you might.
So one thing I find that gets me out of these slumps, like I feel right now, just completely drained of energy, is interacting with people, even if it's just like over the phone or running into someone, face-to-face, in-person conversation. Just often transports me out of, kind of a ho-hum, blah day.
Learn that she talks to herself silently, or cogitates visually, or moves through mental space by traversing physical space. I have a friend who thinks during yoga, and another who browses and compares mental photographs. I know a scientist who plays interior Tetris.
Have I seen how full the LA River is? No, but I hear it's like the spring of 1998. I remember like January, February, March of 1998 in LA, just constant downpour. So, I'm hoping that, the rain doesn't come through my place and stain and damage while I'm out of the country. So yeah, I've been checking in on news reports and videos of what's going on in California. So overall, it's fantastic, man. You can't tell me that we're still in drought.
Rearranging proteins in his dreams. My wife often wears a familiar, faraway look. When I see it, I know that she's rehearsing a complex.
So I notice particularly smart people, they can just kind of tell what I'm thinking just by looking at my face, because you can't think a thought without it rippling across your face. Right? You can't think a word without you kind of silently sound it out in a very subtle, understated way. But all your thoughts ripple across your face, and so the really smart, intuitive people, particularly women, can often immediately sense what it is that you're thinking. It's kind of scary.
Drama in her head, running all the lines. She sometimes pronounces an entire sentence silently before speaking it out loud. In the recent book, Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions, Temple Grandin explains that her mind is filled with detailed images, which she can juxtapose, combine, and revise with verve and precision. Grandin, an animal behaviorist and an agricultural engineer at Colorado State University, has worked designing elements of slaughterhouses and other farm structures. When tasked with estimating the cost of a new building, she looks at her plans, then compares them in her mind with remembered images of past projects. Just by thinking visually, she can accurately estimate that the new building will be twice or 3/4 the cost of one that's come before. After the pandemic began, she read a lot about how medications can help our bodies fight COVID-19. As she read, she developed a detailed visual analogy in which the body was a military base under siege. When she thought about cytokine storms, events in which the immune system becomes overactivated, causing out-of-control inflammation, she didn't conceptualize the idea.
This sounds a little bit about what's your love style. The gifts that have been most meaningful to me have been words, right? Either orally or written down. Other people I know, their love style is, gifts, some physical demonstration. For other people, it's touch. So I'm very much a words guy. Notes. Sweet nothings whispered to me. I remember I would try to communicate with my girlfriend, with the style that was favorite to me, such as like writing notes and saying things. And what usually happened is that for my girlfriends, they primarily wanted like gifts. Gifts is what meant the most to them, not my deep and meaningful notes.
In words. Instead, she writes, I see the soldiers in my immune system going berserk. They become confused and start attacking the base and lighting it on fire. Reading Grandin's book, I often found myself wishing that I were more visual. My mental snapshots of growing up are flimsy. I'm never quite sure whether I'm recalling or imagining them. But Grandin easily accesses clear pictorial memories of her childhood, complete with three-dimensional pictures and videos. She vividly recalls coasting down snow-covered hills on toboggans or flying saucers, and can even feel the lift and dip of the sled as it bumps down the slope. She effortlessly pictures the delicate three-stranded silk she held between her fingers in embroidery class in elementary school. If her mind is an IMAX theater, mine is a fax machine. In the early 20th century, novels like Ulysses, Mrs. Dalloway, and In Search of Lost Time asked us to look inside ourselves at our own minds. Grandin's book similarly directs our attention to what William James called the stream of consciousness.
So as I was walking here, I walked past a wedding. So as society becomes more secular, it puts more and more emphasis on weddings, right? Because as society becomes more secular, and as religion becomes more removed, as there are more and more naturalistic explanations for what's going on in the world, like people live in a less and less enchanted world, so they have to put more effort in to occasions like weddings or bar mitzvahs, or even funerals, or they have to desperately try to add some meaning and some enchantment back into a world that is increasingly drained of both. So I saw a wedding just about to begin here overlooking the ocean. The oceans are Australia's cathedrals, so what a great place to have a wedding. And so people, I think, as a percentage of their income, they're just steadily spending more and more money on weddings in somewhat desperate attempt to add magic and meaning to their lives, given ever encroaching secularism.
The ongoing flow of thoughts in our heads. Our mental life, like a bird's life, seems to be made of an alternation of flights and perchings, James wrote. His aquatic and avian metaphors have a decorous quality. They decline to overspecify what's going on in our minds. Grandin's writing does the opposite, describing with striking concreteness what's happening in her head and possibly yours. Her precise descriptions accentuate differences between minds. In a 1974 essay titled, "What is it like to be a bat?" the philosopher Thomas Nagel argued that we'd never know, because bat sonar differs so profoundly from human vision as to make it unimaginable. Grandin and I...
So one of the ways that people on the left deny science is they want to deny that the different places, the different peoples of the earth have evolved, had any effect whatsoever on the brain, right? And obviously it has, right? In the tropics, all right, where food is plentiful and abundant year-round, right? Excessive, cognitive work may well be maladaptive because it burns up so many calories, and there's not really any need for doing an excessive amount of cognitive work just to find food. While if you're going to survive, harsh winters, you'll have to do a lot of planning and preparation and exercise discipline and cooperation with other people. So obviously, people developing in the tropics is going to develop a brain that is different from people developing in Northern Europe or Northeast Asia. And another fascinating topic that this New Yorker article surprisingly completely ignores. So it's the conventional wisdom by liberals and people on the left that the human brain hasn't changed in the last 10,000 years. And that evolution hasn't shaped the brain differently for different people evolving in different parts of the world, which is, of course, nonsense. And there's a great book, The 10,000 Year Explosion, by Gregory Cochrane and Henry Harpending, the dramatic and varied changes in the brain just through evolution over the past 10,000 years. Have I watched Naked and Afraid, bro? The jungle is full of parasites. No, I have not watched Naked and Afraid.
aren't that far apart, but I struggle to imagine having a mind as extraordinarily visual as hers. At the same time, Grandin and I have many of the same ideas. We both understand cost overruns and cytokine storms, We arrive by divergent routes at the same destinations. How different do our minds really make us? And what should we make of our differences? Grandin, who is on the autism spectrum, came to prominence in 1995 when she published Thinking in Pictures, a memoir that chronicled her years-long search for a way to put her visual and perceptual gifts to use. She found a home in agricultural engineering, where she was capable of visualizing farm buildings from the...
Okay, so she has non-neurotypical gifts. And let me guess. I'm going to guess that she's going to write a book that's an impassioned plea that people like her should be considered more attractive and should be accorded, more understanding and more status and more power and more influence and more of the good things of life. Okay, this seems to be a perennial theme among many female writers and many minority writers.
The animal's perspective. Visiting a slaughterhouse where animals were often panicked, she could instantly see how small visual elements, such as a hanging chain or a reflection in a puddle, were distracting them and causing confusion. Thinking in Pictures made the case for the value of neurodiversity. Grandin's unusual mind succeeded where others couldn't.
Okay, so they want to talk about the value of neurodiversity. You think they dare to talk about the disruptive effect of neurodiversity? You think they dare to talk about the negative aspects of neurodiversity? You think they'd want to go into any depth about why many people shy away from the neurodiverse? No, they only want to talk about, hey, let's celebrate neurodiversity, guys.
Visual thinking, she sharpens her argument, proposing that word-centric people have sidelined other kinds of thinkers. Verbal minds, she argues, run our boardrooms, newsrooms, legislatures, and schools, which have cut back on shop class and the arts while subjecting students to a daunting array of written, standardized tests. The result is a crisis in American ingenuity. Imagine a world with no artists, industrial designers, or inventors, Grandin writes.
Yeah, exactly. So she wants to completely remake reality so that people like her have more status and power and are more valued and are considered more attractive. So she doesn't, delve into, nor does the article, why is it that, higher verbal IQ scores, produce more income, more, general educational success, more status, more cultural influence than people with the ability to rotate objects in 3 dimensions. All right, so that realistic part of why it is that high verbal IQ makes for money, power, and influence, right? They don't want to go into that. There's just this cry from the heart about the nature of reality. Come on, guys.
No electricians, mechanics, architects, plumbers, or builders.
Yeah, just because verbal IQ creates more money and power and influence on average than spatial IQ doesn't mean that we're not going to have people with high spatial intelligence, right? We're never going to have a society without engineers, right? We're never going to have a society that doesn't need people who are high in spatial intelligence. Back to the New Yorker
These are
article.
our visual thinkers, many hiding in plain sight, and we have failed to understand, encourage, or appreciate their specific contributions.
I think people tend to be appreciated, in alignment with how much they contribute, right? If you contribute a lot, think about the enormous power and explanatory value and predictive power of these live streams, all right? As we change lives here, right? And so when you do that, you get appreciation, right? If you have important skills, you do things for others, you reshape society, you solve problems for people, then you're going to get appreciation. If you don't do those things, you're only going to get affirmative action style appreciation, but that's what she wants. She wants affirmative action appreciation.
In Thinking in Pictures, Grandin suggested that the world was divided between visual and verbal thinkers. Visual thinking gently revises the idea,
Yeah, like we never thought that there was any difference between verbal and spatial IQ before, and till this non-neurotypical woman started writing and instructing us about how reality should be. Okay, I got some energy back. The sun's come out. I'm gonna continue on my journey south. Bye bye.